This
to
conference will now be recorded.
It is 3 o'clock, and just a reminder for everyone on the call to please put yourself on mute. We will go through the presentation and then take questions at the end. So if you can just ensure that you're muted, both your computer and telephone sometimes have to be muted, so just check those. All right, so the mission of Minnesota Housing is to provide access to safe, decent, and affordable housing and build stronger communities across the state. Minnesota Housing offers products and services to help Minnesotans buy and fix up their homes and to stabilize neighborhoods, communities, and families. It also supports the development and preservation of affordable rental housing through both financing and long-term asset management. It has pioneered a successful model for supportive housing that stabilizes the lives of some of the state's most vulnerable citizens. So I want to first congratulate all of you for becoming administrators for the COVID-19 Housing Assistance Program. We really wish we could do introductions with all of the 44 grant administrators and their partners who will be providing housing assistance statewide, but that would take the bulk of our time today. So we hope that you'll be able to meet and get to know each other in the near future during some online meetings that we'll be hosting. We have a full agenda and have time even beyond 4 p.m. if needed for questions. We're going to be starting with Hattie Heiler, who will give us a description of the central intake process. Then I will give a brief overview of the program guidelines. Nancy Urbanski will be covering due diligence, and I will talk about submission deadlines and communication, and then we'll answer any questions that you may have. So it will be helpful if you can hold questions until the end of the session. So before I turn it over to Hattie, I just want to also introduce myself. My name is Diane Elias, and I work at Minnesota Housing. We manage a few programs that provide assistance to households who are facing homelessness or are already experiencing homelessness, and we're trying to get them back into housing. One of those programs is the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program. Another program is Homework Starts with Home that works with schools and local housing providers. And then another program that we have is a landlord risk mitigation program that helps incentivize landlords to consider taking households that they may not otherwise rent to. So we're going to break this up a little bit so that you're not just hearing my voice throughout the whole thing. So I'll turn it over to Hattie, because one of the most interesting aspects of this new program is what we've been able to set up for the central intake process. Go ahead, Hattie.
Great. Thanks, Diane. As Diane mentioned, my name is Hattie Heiler. I also work with Diane at Minnesota Housing, and I have been working with 211 and Housing Link to create this centralized intake process for clients who are trying to access the housing assistance that you all will be administering. So if you could, Meredith, great. So this diagram outlines roughly what I think one is.
Hold on one second. If you are not muted, if you could please mute your phone, that would be great, because we do hear some interference.
Thanks. So this is a kind of a schematic of how a household would access the funds and get connected with you all. So individuals can contact, dial 211. We'll also have some toll-free number that we can provide either on their cell phone or on a landline. They can also text MN Rent to 898-211, or they can directly access the pre-screening eligibility questions online. Regardless of what point they connect to our process, every individual will be asked for pre-screening eligibility questions. Are you a Minnesota resident? Do you have a rent payment, mortgage payment, homeownership dues, contract for deed payment, home insurance payment, utility payment, or housing related payment with a due date of March 1st, 2020 or later that is past due? Is the housing issue due to unemployment, illness, or another issue that happened as a result of COVID-19 pandemic? And finally, are you currently receiving rental assistance such as a housing choice voucher, project-based assistance, or other similar state or federal rental assistance? So regardless of how an individual is connecting to these four pre-screening eligibility questions, if an individual clears the eligibility questions, they'll be asked to provide their address so that they can select one of you all as an administrator that's serving in their location, and then they'll provide their initial contact information, either a phone number or an email address. And with that information, they'll be sent a link to complete the account, complete their account, and then complete their application. With that initial contact information, based on the administrator that they've selected, that information will be provided to that initial administrator. Now we know that some people may be calling 211 and don't have internet access, and that's why they're calling 211. If they do indicate that they don't have internet access, they only have access to a landline, the account information that is sent to the grant administrator will be flagged to provide a follow-up call for that individual. Now, for people who are not eligible, they go through those four pre-screening questions. They can provide their contact information and be sent additional resources, even though they weren't eligible for the COVID housing assistance program. Meredith, would you go to the next slide? So once an individual has cleared those eligibility questions, provided their contact information, they'll be sent a link to complete the common application. Meredith, would you mind selecting that just so we can show kind of an example? This is an example of what the common application looks like. There'll be instructions. If you'll just scroll down, you can see that they'll put in additional demographic information. They'll be asked to provide an ID if they have one. If not, they can check that they don't have an ID. They'll also be asked the sort of payment information that the bill that they need and the amount that they are requesting assistance. They'll be asked for documentation of this bill. If they can't upload the documents, they can check that. And grant administrators, they'll need to provide you with that documentation in person, in paper form. And then they'll also be asked for information about their income. Again, they'll be able to upload the documentation, but if they can't upload, they'll check that they cannot upload these documentations, and they'll need to be in contact with you, grant administrators, to provide paper copies. Finally, they'll complete certification, checking various certifications. And once they have checked that the certifications completed the application and marked the application as complete, they'll have a signature document that they'll need to sign and return to you as well. Thanks, Meredith. So as I've shared, the client can complete the application online. For those individuals who do not have internet access, a grant administrator will need to assist a client to complete that online application. As I said, clients can either upload documents or check that they cannot upload, and in that case, they'll have to provide paper documentations to you, grant administrators. And then administrators, you can update the status of an application, and I'll walk through what those statuses are in the next slide, and then clients can log back in to see the status of their application. So on the left, you'll see the status, the application statuses. The two that I kind of bolded in put in italics are two places that we have where Housing Link is building in checkpoints for fraud. Once a client marks that an application is complete, the system will check based off of a client's name and provided ID to see if another applicant with the same name and ID exists in the system with another administrator. And if that's the case, there'll be a flag. And then once you all as administrators identify that an application is approved for payment, you'll have two additional pieces of information you'll need to enter: the final payment amount and the bill start and end dates. You'll need to enter that information because that'll be the second point of fraud check that the system will incorporate. And it'll check if there's the same payment amount for the same bill period for the same individual somewhere else in the system. And if so, there'll be a flag that will pop up identifying that there's a potential duplicate. And in both of those instances, we're asking that you as administrators reach out to Minnesota Housing on how to resolve those potential duplicates. That's everything about the central intake system and the common application. I'm happy to take questions at the end of the presentation.
Oh, hi, Hattie. I was muted and didn't realize. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great. So I was just wondering if you could quickly explain before we move to the next part of our presentation, what would happen if households contact a program administrator to apply before calling 211 and how that would work?
Yes, thank you. I meant to go over that, and I appreciate the additional question reminding me that I wanted to go over that. So if an individual comes directly to a grant administrator, you're going to essentially be kind of operating like 211 would, where you're going to log on to the website with a client and help them complete the initial eligibility questions. And if that client clears those eligibility questions, you can help them put in their address and their contact information, and then simply the administrator would need to select the administrator that the client is working with as the administrator that the account needs to be assigned to. So thanks, Diane. I meant to cover that and I forgot.
Hello. Sorry, my phone every once in a while gets muted automatically by the system. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the program guidelines that we'll be sharing with all of you. We will have a document that will be available so that you can look at different parts of the program about reporting, monitoring, how the filing will work, income documentation, and so on. And so that will be available shortly. So I just want to make you aware of this next slide, which highlights the website. You've probably already all accessed this website. This is where all of the application materials were located and the frequently asked questions and some of those documents. And so we'll be continuing to update this website for our administrators and start including the things that you'll need to run the program, such as a reporting format that you'll be submitting back to us on a regular basis. This is where you'll be able to find some contacts for program administrators. You'll have the program guidelines listed on here. And so that's all being constructed. So how it looks right now, and you can click on it, Meredith, just to remind people of where this might be. But how it looks now won't be how it looks, in the next coming days or weeks. And so just keep an eye on this website because you'll see that there'll be changes made as we go through the program launch period. And then there's also on this website the ability for households to access assistance. And so we do have a link for households. And that way they can go to a page that talks about what's available and how they can access assistance. And we're also reconstructing that website so that it'll be ready for the program launch. So just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of that and to continue to go back to that website as a reference point. All right, so in the next slide, I just want to recover some of the things that we outlined in the RFP. It's always helpful to remind ourselves of how this program is going to look, and also we have updated a couple of things periodically, so I just want to make sure you have the latest information. So for households to be eligible, they need to be a Minnesota resident, and then both renters and homeowners need to be at 300% or below federal poverty guidelines. Preference is given to households who are at or below 200% federal poverty guidelines for both renters and owners now. So prior to this, in the RFP instructions, we talked about a preference for renter households at 200%. Now we are also having a preference for homeowners at 200%. So basically, anyone who's applying for assistance, preference will be given to those who are at 200% or below federal poverty guidelines. And then, of course, they have to have a rent payment, mortgage payment, homeowner association dues, contract for deed, and other housing-related payments that have occurred after March 1st and that are past due. They also must be unable to make the payment because of the public health emergency due to unemployment, illness, or another COVID-19 related issue. You may recall that Hattie indicated that there were some certifications that the individual applying just checks off. So they're not necessarily going to have any kind of documentation that they have to show for COVID related situation, but they just have to certify that it is COVID related. And so some of the things that you may have anticipated you might need documentation for, we've really tried not to make that a cumbersome process. So I just wanted to point out that some of these will just be handled in the self-certification of the common household application. All right, so next slide. With income, as I mentioned, the households will be at 300% federal poverty guidelines or below, with the preference for both renters and homeowners at 200% or below. And that is a change from what you saw before. The eligible households, and one other thing, I forgot about the income calculation workbook. We should really go to that because that's helpful. So for those of you that have not worked with our programs before, the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program is another program that provides prevention assistance. And we have created an income calculation workbook, which Meredith is showing on her screen. One nice thing about this is that it allows you to take information that households are providing you for income, such as pay stubs, and put it right into this worksheet, and then it will automatically calculate their income for you on a monthly basis. So that really alleviates some of the headaches of calculating income. Sometimes when people are calculating income, they'll use 4 weeks, sometimes they'll use 30 days. It just all depends on how they're calculating. So this really takes a little bit of the work out of it and makes the income calculation fairly consistent. So this is a tool that you'll be able to use when calculating income. It's available on our website, and it'll be something that you can download and just use over and over as you're trying to calculate income through pay stubs or other means. All right, so eligible expenses for the program are going to be outlined. You saw them both in the RFP instructions as well as our program guidelines will have the details. So I didn't list every single type of payment that's eligible here, but just the major ones will be rent payments, mortgage payments, utilities, and other housing related payments such as association dues, manufactured home lot rents, and you saw some on the prior slide as well. If you have a question about the type of payment or whether it would be eligible, please reach out to us. You can email us anytime with questions, and we're happy to answer those for you. The housing expense payments must be made to the entities that are owed. So these are some examples, but landlords or financial service providers such as a mortgage company, contracts for deed vendors, utility companies, manufactured home park owner, really any entity that is owed the housing cost, this is where you're going to be paying the funds. So they won't go directly to the household, but they'll be paid on behalf of the household to the entity that the bill is owed to. So just making sure that everyone is aware of that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the common application that Hattie has mentioned. She gave you the overview of how the process will work, how the common application form will be in a central location and how people will access it. And we'll continue to provide detail on this, and Housing Link will also be providing a training so that everybody can learn how the system works. And so you'll have plenty of opportunity to hear more. I don't want you to think that today is the only day. And the same with the information that I'm doing in this overview. This is a very broad overview, but we'll continue to provide some webinars and training, especially for those that have not administered our programs before. So for the common application, there are some things that the household is going to have to pull together. One is a personal identification number. As Hetty mentioned, there's a number of different items that they could use: a driver's license, a passport number. They do not need to upload a copy of the document into the system. They only need to input the number. And if they do not have a number, they can say, I don't have a number, and that application can still be accepted. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that there's an option for saying I don't have a number, but that there also is not a requirement to upload their personal identification into the system. So they just need to have a number or to say they don't have a number so that we can help track which households are in the system. And that's just to help us delineate if there's more than one John Smith, we're not thinking that it's the same individual, for example. And then for income, they will have to upload information into the system. That information, Hattie mentioned, could be pay stubs or a Social Security statement, something that they're receiving, maybe MFIP. And those items would be able to be uploaded in the system, and anything that they need assistance uploading, that hopefully program administrators will be able to help them with that if they're not able to do it on their own. And then another item that they do have to upload into the system is a copy of the bill. And so that could be, a copy of a rent letter from the landlord, for example, could be the copy of their mortgage statement, and so on. And then the household certification and release of information is the fourth item that they would need to submit. And this one is the most difficult. So I'll talk a little bit about this in the following pages, but just want to make sure that I tell you what all of these items are before we move forward. So as I mentioned on the next slide, I covered personal identification and just letting you know that there are options for people to put an ID online. And so here's some of the examples that they could use. And then that would satisfy that part of the application. And then the second is the income documentation. And as mentioned, there's a number of different ways that people can describe their income. If there's not documentation of income, another way to try to address the income documentation is to get third-party verification. So what that would be is calling up the employer or the person who has employed them or is providing them the income and asking for verification of how many hours they worked and how much they've been paid. And so for those of you that haven't done this before, having a third-party verification form is really useful. And so if you don't have a form, I would suggest creating a third-party verification form that includes information such as the name of the employer, the name of the client, the name of the staff that's calling, and the date and time that you called, and then something that notes how much they make per hour and how many hours they work, and that way it will allow you to calculate their monthly income. And finally, if there are no documents available for income and there's no third-party verification, which in the time of COVID could be happening on a more frequent basis than what we typically see. For example, employers that are no longer in existence because of COVID-19 may not be able to be, you may not be able to get a hold of anyone because the business has shut down. So in that circumstance, then clients can use a self-certification. And that is just certifying that they do not have income. And so you can make that form as well available. And that can be something that a client can fill out and say, I do not have income because, the business shut down, and that self-certification can act as the documentation of their income. We really want to emphasize that for folks that are able to access pay stubs and documentation of any type of income like public assistance, that's really the ideal, and we would love to see that. But we also know that sometimes, and especially in this time where we're not always doing face-to-face contact, that can be really challenging. So we just want to make sure that not too much time goes by before you try to secure third-party verification or self-certification. If you find that clients are unable to provide those income documents, I would suggest moving forward to the next step within a few days, because we don't want to leave someone behind just because they're not able to produce the income documentation if there's another way that we can get that information. All right, next slide. So for the bills themselves, we certainly don't require a specific type of bill, but we do want to see some kind of evidence that there is a past due bill. And so the payment should have been something that was due after March 1st, and there should be some kind of evidence that the bill is still due. And so there's a couple of different ways that this happens. One is on the client side, where they're submitting the evidence of what bill needs to be paid, and that'll happen within that common application process. But then on the administrator side, there will be other things that will be happening, and I'll cover those in a minute. Next slide. So on the final piece, where I mentioned that households must certify that the information uploaded into the system is correct, and then they also sign a release of information. This is probably the most difficult piece of documentation that needs to be submitted by the client. And I'll tell you why. If I'm applying for assistance and I have access to a mobile device or a computer, I can often get a PDF copy sent to me of my utility bill or something from the landlord that's emailed so that I can upload it to the system right from my computer or right from my phone. And if I have a phone, I can even take photos of documents such as my utility bill that came in the mail, and I can upload that information into the system because it is mobile friendly. But in the case of signing something, that means that I have to have a physical document that's been printed out that I can physically sign with a pen and then upload into the system. That is a potential challenge for some households who don't have a printer or don't have access to that. And so that's where households may need help with getting something from the administrator mailed to them or sent to them so that they can sign it and then return it. Or if households are able to come to your office and be able to sign there, that might be how this has to happen. So this is something that we have determined we need as a part of this federal program, and we will try to get the feedback about the experience of it with everyone so that we can better understand how it's going. It may be that this changes in the future if it becomes incredibly cumbersome, but right now this is our starting point. So I would encourage everybody to make sure that they have a copy of that certification form. And that will be on our website also. So all of the forms that I'm talking about, you'll have access to. That client form that Hattie showed you, the common household application, that's going to be on our website so that you have at least the questions that households are going to be answering in the system. And then also this certification that they need to sign and upload will be available on our website as well. All right, so now I'll get into the administrator documentation. So as an administrator, obviously you're checking to make sure that everything's been uploaded into the system from the client's end, and possibly assisting them with whatever needs to be sent into that system. But then for your own files, you'll probably have the following: some type of payment verification from the landlord, mortgage, or other company. Because as an administrator, especially if you've administered these types of programs before, sometimes clients think a bill is a certain amount, but then when you check with the landlord or utility company, maybe a portion has been paid already, or maybe there are fees that can be waived, such as late fees. And that's the beauty of being a program administrator, is you have some of that expertise to be able to adjust the bill accordingly. And once you have that verification of the final bill that's owed, then you would have something from the landlord or mortgage company that would act as your kind of verification that this is the amount that's owed. And then most agencies will also have the company or landlord, mortgage provider or utility company complete a W-9 so that they can make a payment, and that's for tax purposes. Most agencies will do that, and it's a common tax form. And then also in the file will likely be a copy of the check or payment voucher, and that's just really helpful to show that the payment did go out for this particular bill, and that a check was made to the entity that was owed. And so if for whatever reason you don't have, say, a payment verification form, or you don't have copies of a W-9, or you don't have payment vouchers created in some kind of form that you can track, you should probably think about making sure that you have those forms available. So I also want to mention that even though we're covering a lot of the program elements and then some of the things that you'll have to submit in order to execute the contract today, we do have a second session planned for Thursday at 1 p.m. And it is going to be different than this session. It's not a repeat. There are contract requirements that we need to discuss at that time. And because the contract is still being written so that we can get the rest of the language, we didn't have the ability to present it today. And there's so little time in this review, we really wanted to make sure we have enough time to cover it. So at the Thursday session, you'll hear more about the contract requirements, about the reporting, the monitoring, the disbursement, and then some of the contract attachments that will include things like the work plan. And Nancy will get into some of that detail in the next session. So I will turn it over to Nancy to talk to you about how you get the contract executed with the documents that we need in order for us to sign on our end.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to make sure that I'm unmuted. Diane, can you hear me, or Meredith?
I can.
Okay, perfect. I just want to first of all introduce myself for those of you that don't know me. My name is Nancy Urbanski, and I work alongside Diane quite closely in the programs that she described at the beginning of the presentation. And along with Diane and the rest of the staff that are on this phone call today, I want to congratulate you on your agency being selected as a grantee for the COVID-19 Housing Assistance Program. I'm looking so forward to working with you all over the next several months. Next slide, please. In my presentation, which is quite brief, this is by far the most important thing I want to stress to you. So before I review the due diligence items, I want to highlight a federal requirement that you will need to do in addition to the due diligence. Excuse me. At the top of the screen, you'll see highlighted in yellow, and that's to show you how important this next item is. So federal funds require that all grant administrators have a DUNS number, which is the Data Universal Numbering System. There's a link to the website where you can register to receive a number. It will take 1 or 2 days to receive it. If you have a DUNS number already, it may still be valid, but please check because this does need to be reviewed every 3 years. In addition, the DUNS number may need to be registered at the System for Award Management website, also known as SAM.gov, We are figuring it out as we speak, and so we will follow up with you and let you know if you do need to complete that second step, and so we will keep you updated. I can't stress this enough. If you do not have a DUNS number, please complete the first step to securing one after this webinar. This number will need to be provided to us as part of the grant contract process. The items that have an asterisk next to them will be provided as documents in an email that need to be completed and returned to us, which include the signed contract and the work plan. You have not received these yet because we're finalizing these documents, as Diane said, and you should receive them by this Thursday's webinar. The other 3 items will be things you have to submit if applicable, but we will provide instructions or a link. And I will go through each of them with you now to clarify what those are. When you receive the grant contract and attached exhibits, please take time to review these in their entirety. Once all of the due diligence items have been approved, Minnesota Housing will initiate electronic signing of the contract via DocuSign. And the contract will be sent to those individuals that you identified that have delegated signing authority. In addition to the signed contract, you'll need to submit documentation of delegated signing authority, which I just mentioned. This document will list the names of the individuals from your organization that are authorized to sign the grant contract. Documentation that you submit can include a board resolution or bylaws or another organizational document.
Nancy,
as Diane said,
oh, I was just going to say, I think that part of it is really key because we don't provide a form for that, but we do request that you list who the designated signing authority is. So for organizations, they just have to figure out like who's authorized to sign this agreement and how can we communicate that. And in some way, it could be an official letterhead, for example, from your organization saying this is the designated authority, or some kind of board resolution that you have from the past that has already said that this person is the designated signer. You probably have some kind of document that says who it is, but just share that with us so that we know who the designated signer is, because we don't have a form for you to fill out for that.
Thanks for that additional clarity, Diane. As Diane stated, we'll be providing you with more detail about the work plan at our Thursday webinar. But just so that you can start thinking about it, I'll just give you a little bit of insight as to what you can expect that we'll be looking for. So one of the things that you'll need to submit on your work plan is if your selected award is less than what you applied for, you'll be asked to provide updated information related to the updated proposed number of households that you'll be serving, as well as an updated budget. And we'll also be asking for detail regarding your subgrantees if applicable. After you submit your work plan, it will be reviewed by program staff and eventually it will be approved. And there are times that we go back and forth 1 or 2 times asking for revisions on your work plan. And during that process, we will be definitely keyed into the timeliness of getting these documents back to you and informing you of approval. So we'll communicate with you very readily. And that communication will go through our grant email address. Also, if you have not registered as a vendor with the state of Minnesota, this will need to be completed prior to your completing the electronic funds transfer authorization form. We did go over this at the RFP webinar, but in case you haven't had time to do that, just wanted to provide you with that information. And so you can go into this link to complete that process, and it will walk you through that process. Once that form is completed, you can then provide Minnesota Housing with your vendor number and send us a copy of your W-9 so that payments to your organization will not be delayed. And instructions on how to complete these forms are provided on the back of each document. And then as was mentioned earlier, you will need to provide Minnesota Housing with your DUNS number as well. Minnesota Housing will be electronically depositing funds into your agency's financial institution on the disbursement schedule, which will be identified in your contract. So if you're a new vendor or current vendor, but your account information has changed, you must submit this EFT transfer authorization form. In addition, at any time during this grant period, if for some reason your banking information changes, you'll want to immediately notify us and submit a bank change form to ensure that funds are deposited into your correct account. And again, instructions on how to complete this form both of these forms is provided on the back of the document. If your account information remains the same, there's no action required of you. I will now pass this back to Diane, who will be talking about submission and deadlines.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. So we need you to send all of the items that we have talked about into our email, mhfa.grants@state.mn.us. The most important part that we're hoping you can remember is that in the subject line, you name the name of the project and then the name of you as the grant administrator. So for example, your project name might be Project A and the grant would be Joe Sam's organization. And so then you would put that into every email where you're submitting documentation so that we can keep track of it. Use the same sort of name in each email that you send. You do not need to send all the documents at the same time. You can send them separately. Some people feel more comfortable sending everything together, and some feel better if they submit as they go. I think the most important part that Nancy mentioned was that the work plan sometimes goes back and forth. So that's one of the things that you'll want to complete first, and you can't do it yet because we haven't provided it to you. So I understand the conundrum here. But as soon as you get it, that would be something that I would work on as fast as possible to get to us, just in case we have comments back. And then it's much easier if you have your full grant award and you're not making any changes. But if you are making some changes, then it really does need to be submitted, and we might have some comments back and forth in the interim. All right, and then all items must be received and approved before the execution of the grant contract. The reimbursement of expenses incurred prior to the execution of the grant contract will not be covered. So what that means is that we don't want you to take any action to start the program until you have the agreement signed by Minnesota Housing. And we provide a PDF copy of that really quickly after we receive all of the documents and everything has been approved. That'll happen really fast, but in the interim, until you've received that signed document back where we've signed it after you sign and give us all the documentation, then you can start doing expenses, but don't do it before. All items for the due diligence should be submitted and received by 4:30 this Friday, August 14th. That is our goal. However, we also understand that you haven't received the contract agreement or the work plan yet. So these are going to be signed as soon as we get all of the due diligence back from you. That may be early next week instead of the end of this week, but we're really hoping that we can do this as fast as possible. One of the things that I'm really cognizant of is that, Nancy and I have been working on this program for the past several weeks, and we had a heads up from other communities and state organizations who had started to implement similar programs. And one of the things that they said was, just be prepared to work 24 hours a day. And it certainly has become true for all of us working on this project. We are definitely working some very long hours. And I understand that now that you're all part of this process, that you also will be putting in some significant time and effort that you may not have anticipated. So any questions that you have, you're welcome to contact us. I can tell you that, especially if you CC both Nancy and myself, even if it's late at night, one of us is likely to get back to you. We just have been trying to make ourselves available at all hours that we can during the waking day. And so you are welcome to try and reach us, especially as you're going through this process. We really want to provide as much support and technical assistance to you as we can. We also know that we have several new providers, as I mentioned, several new administrators. I'm using that term interchangeably, by the way, in case you haven't noticed. Provider and administrator is largely the same. So if you do have questions, please do get a hold of us. Please reach out. We're very interested in hearing from you if you have any questions about something like the documentation and about the information that we presented today. All right, so speaking of communication, I really wanted to talk about the communication between Minnesota Housing and its administrators for this program. We're very aware that this is a new program that we're building faster than we have built a program before, and we are asking you to partner with us to administer this program at the same exact time that we're building it. It's going to be a challenge, and I think we're all going to need to be really patient with each other as we do this work together. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to make some mistakes, and we're going to have to talk to each other about that and learn. So we do have some ideas on how we can stay connected, but I would also love to hear your ideas about how we can communicate in the best way possible as well. I want to highlight the existing prevention assistance system that we have in the state, and then follow up with some information and context that may be helpful to you. Especially if households need additional support, or you find out that their housing issue isn't COVID related, or they're not eligible because the payments are from February and not March. So I'll go into a little bit of that during this part of the presentation. So we anticipate that we will start with weekly meetings with our grant administrators. During the pandemic, when we were working with our family homeless prevention and assistance program providers, we found that this was a really good way to share information quickly about how we were revamping our programs during the pandemic. Certainly offices were closed, people were having to do business differently. Minnesota Housing had to make some changes in order to accommodate that, and so the communication between all of the providers was really helpful. So we anticipate starting with weekly meetings, but we expect that those may change over time to be maybe bi-weekly, because that way you can connect with us on a regular basis. We expect that we may host some new administrator meetings in addition to that, or at least have some ability to connect with our new administrators in a different way. There are 11 of the 44 that are not currently contracting with Minnesota Housing in some form, and we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to talk about any issues that come up as new administrators. All right, and then for the next slide, I just wanted to make sure that you knew for our existing prevention programs, we really do value the feedback and the expertise of our administrators, and we love hearing from them. Hearing about the household situations, the challenges, it really helps us as program managers identify where we can improve the system. And then it also helps us figure out questions that other administrators might have or that we haven't anticipated, and try to figure out a way that we can resolve those. So our emails are going to be available to you in this presentation, and you probably already have them, but we do want to hear from you. You may ask us about any questions, eligibility scenarios, and we will try to brainstorm that with you as well. And finally, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we do have an existing prevention assistance system in Minnesota. We're really fortunate as a state that we have some programs to provide prevention assistance. They do not have the resources to help everyone, and we're very aware of that, but compared to other states, we're really lucky that we have something in place that can help prevent homelessness for households. And that's really helpful because you may need to rely on some of these programs if you find that you have households that seek your assistance that don't qualify or aren't eligible for the program. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that Minnesota has 10 continuum of care statewide that facilitate access to homeless and housing services using something called coordinated entry. And it's a process by which most households will be able to access assistance for housing when there's an emergency. There's usually a COC coordinator in each of these communities that you can connect with, and they often have meetings, usually monthly. So what I want to be able to do is try to offer you those contact folks so that you can connect with them directly and learn about the continuum of care in the region. And then prevention assistance is a part of that continuum. So it certainly provides resources to those that are chronically homeless, all the way to chronically homeless, but it also provides resources on the prevention side. In particular, Continuum of Cares receive HUD funding, and they are actively involved in coordinating this funding with other state and federal resources. So I want to encourage you to connect with them and to talk about your program and how it can coordinate with that existing network that's already there. I think that's going to be really helpful, especially if you're a new program. And then we are really fortunate that we have about $10 million a year from the legislature for the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program. And that's to help prevent homelessness and help homeless households get back into housing. The largest program in the state is this for prevention. And there are other programs. The Office of Economic Opportunity has some prevention funds that go out into the state, and Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans has a large prevention program currently running. And then, of course, there's the emergency programs such as emergency assistance or emergency general assistance that usually operate through the county. So there are definitely some programs out there. And we also have philanthropic programs that you may be aware of in your own community that provide resources as well, or faith-based organizations that have some small pools of money that they're able to help with housing assistance. But in particular, the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program does have advisory committees in 20 communities across the state. They do have statewide coverage, and the advisory committees are made up of landlords and housing providers, sometimes law enforcement, sometimes different advocacy groups that have joined, and even participants who have experienced homelessness in the past are present. It's a great opportunity for you to network, and they often have meetings, sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly, but I will also try to get the names of those grant coordinators to you as well, so that you have both the FHPAP and the COC coordinators. And I just have to ask them first because I haven't asked to share their numbers, so I'm going to do that today. And then hopefully I'll be able to send you all of that contact information so that you can connect with them. All right, so we're moving to the questions part. We already have a number of questions in the chat. So what I'm going to suggest is that we read a chat question and then go to anyone who would like to ask a question online, and then we'll go back to the chat and just go back and forth so that we can try to accommodate as many questions as we can. Anything that we can't answer, we'll hold on to, and we'll try to answer your questions on Thursday. All right, so Meredith, are you able to give the first chat question?
This is Nancy. Excuse me, I can see the questions. So as long as you can hear me, I will go ahead and read these. The first question I can respond to. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available on our website sometime later today. There is a question about what language capacity does 211 have, and how will non-English speaking households apply for CHAP?
This is Hattie. I can answer that question. 211 has a number of their phone services available in a number of languages. And we also have the application translated into Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. 211 has more language capacity translation abilities than that, but the application is translated into Hmong, Somali, and Spanish.
And Hattie, this next question is for you. How will grant administrators be notified of a completed application?
Yes, so when an applicant, so just speaking in general to the kind of process through which an applicant is sent to an administrator, you'll have a queue of applications that'll all have different statuses. And so applications that once an applicant has identified that their application is complete, the status will change from in progress to complete.
Okay, thanks. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for people to unmute too. So I'll ask for questions from the audience before we go back to the chat questions. Any question from the audience that you want to unmute?
Hi, question. So the W-9 obviously is going to be a key document to get payment out. Is it possible to get the W-9 as part of the application, included as part of the application material that they upload?
That's a great question. So the W-9 would actually be something that you would be securing from the landlord or from the mortgage company, for example. And so in that circumstance, that is not being uploaded into the system. That's something that administrators will collect and put in their files in their office.
We often have to collect them for us. But...
Okay, yeah, yep. Great, thank you. All right, how about another chat box question? So I see one that says, when can we expect a reporting calendar? That's a great question. That will be an attachment that comes with your agreement. So the grant contract that we send out will have a reporting calendar, I believe, attached with that. So hopefully in the
sorry
next
that
day.
I was on mute when I was so sorry that I wasn't available to read these questions, Diane. We hope to be giving you a preview of what that reporting template will look like on Thursday, and if not, you'll receive that as soon as contracts are executed. Will multiple administrators serve the same geographic area? You said consumers select an organization to work with. How do they know which organization to select?
Yes, that is a great question. So there are multiple administrators potentially in the service area, or there may be as few as one. So there is a map that is being created with the geographies of all of the administrators, and 211 and Housing Link will be able to use that map to allow the households to know which providers are in their area. And so they'll say, these are the grant administrators that are in your area. Which one would you like to choose? And that's kind of how it will work. The same thing will be possible online, and maybe Hattie can explain that part for households that are applying online themselves.
Yes, so same process. When a client enters their address, it'll populate administrators in their area. One piece of information that we are asking potential applicants to provide at that step is if they're a renter or homeowner, to help delineate if a organization is only serving renters or only serving homeowners.
Great. Patty, since you've got the stage, I'm going to pass another question to you. Diane, did you have more to say about that? I apologize.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. So with the preference of household incomes at or below 200% of poverty, will those somehow be flagged by those applying online?
We are working on that right now. So I do not have an answer at this moment, but can hopefully get back to you at a later date about how that information will get flagged in the system.
All right. And Assad, you had asked a question as well about administrators, worded a little bit differently. I think we answered your question, but if we did not, please feel free to unmute and let us know if you need additional clarification.
My question is, oh, sorry. Yeah, this
no,
is
please go ahead.
My question is, you know, how the applicant will choose the administrator. Is that based on geographic area, or they just can choose whoever they want?
It is based on. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
No, go ahead, Hattie.
Yes, so all of the geographies that you've been providing us in terms of your service areas, we've been able to map the geographies of your service area. And so when an applicant provides their address, that map will take an applicant's address and then determine which which administrators have service areas that are serving that particular address, and it'll only populate administrators that have service areas for that address. So the list that'll populate will only be for administrators that are going to be serving within that client's community.
Thank you.
And Asad, I
Hattie.
think that's a great question, because I think one of the things that will be tricky is for organizations who are serving populations and might serve outside of the community. So they may have applied for funds for, say, Ramsey County or St. Louis County or something like that, for example. But they might also serve households outside of that community if a request was made. That's going to be the challenging part, is trying to figure out how we can make that accommodation. So this is going to be one of those learning as we go processes, and hopefully you'll be able to see the geographic areas on the map as well. We'll have that map available for our administrators, and if we need to make changes, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you. Here's a question. What does the 200% poverty preference mean in terms of the grant amount? And for the questioner, if I don't answer this adequately, please feel free to unmute and ask for clarification. In terms of the selection amount that applicants received, I know that we sent an email out last week. It does not impact the award that you received. It will really only impact the households that you are prioritizing over all others that might be eligible and fall within that 200% to 300% federal poverty range.
Thanks, Nancy. How about we take a caller now, if anybody is on the phone and wants to unmute and ask a question, and then we'll go back to the chat box.
Hi.
For collecting.
Hi, Angela. I'll take Angela's question first and then the following one.
Okay, hi. Angela Larson. I was just wondering if a person is a participant in the Section 8 program or another rental assistance program and they have not paid their portion of the rent, would they still be eligible for this assistance? And then the second part is, if they're part of, say, a permanent supportive housing program where maybe a program pays their rent, but they're responsible to pay a participant portion, but that's paid to the program rather than the landlord, would those payments be eligible for this program?
Those are great questions, and I believe we may have even had a frequently asked question answer for this. So I'm gonna give you kind of a summary level answer, but then I'll make sure that this gets added to our frequently asked questions. So the intent of the program is not to provide assistance for households that are already receiving rent based on income. And what that means is that if their rent is supposed to be adjusted when their income adjusts, then they typically wouldn't be eligible because that should follow the income. So in the case of Section 8, where they're supposed to be paying 30% and it's allowed to be adjusted in accordance to income changes, they may not be eligible, but there are some extenuating circumstances that happen. Sometimes, for example, someone might have a mental health crisis and they don't notify Section 8 that their income has changed, and so their portion is due and they're not paying it, but they really should have been adjusted. We can try to work together on those, but I would suggest emailing us directly about those particular scenarios, and we'll try to work that out. For supportive housing situations, it gets a little bit more complicated, because in those circumstances, the rent is also based on the household income and is supposed to be adjusted accordingly. And this is for most circumstances. There are affordable housing units where someone might have qualified based on income, but their rent does not adjust if their income changes. That's a different scenario, and those households would be more likely to be eligible. But for supportive housing where their rent should be adjusted as soon as they have an income change, And because they have case managers that are being provided funding to help work with those households to make sure that that happens, we're not seeing those households as eligible yet. Certainly contact us with individualized circumstances, because we know that sometimes it does happen where a case manager isn't able to connect with the household, or some extenuating circumstance. Maybe everyone got laid off due to COVID and there is no case manager. So, definitely contact us if you see those situations. But in large part, households who are receiving rent assistance that is supposed to adjust for their income would not be eligible unless you contact us about specific circumstances. All right, and there was one other caller that was trying to speak.
Hi, this is Leah from Three Rivers. Question about collecting signatures. Is it possible for us to use electronic signatures through Adobe Sign or DocuSign or something like that?
Yes, I wish we could do that. We definitely pursued that option, and right now we're not able to do it. We are able to do DocuSign for doing grant agreements, but on an individual level, we weren't able to make that work. So we're still trying to figure out what other alternatives are, but in the interim, we have to go with the physical signature process for now. All right, Nancy, how about another chat box question?
Okay, how does per cap payment or tribal stimulus payments affect the income calculation workbook?
Yeah, this is a good question. If it's okay, I think we will try to answer this on Thursday. I have this same question that I am posing to our legal staff as well, and so just want to make sure that I get the right answer to you. I can tell you that the way that we've handled it for per cap payments that are made like once a year or once a quarter is that we apply them over time. And there are some circumstances, however, where there's a federal related law that allows for the income not to be counted. So I have to be very careful about what I say on that answer because it just depends on the type of payment. But as an example, some per cap payments where it's once a year at the end of say a fiscal or a fiscal year, or maybe in December, there would be a one-time payment. You could spread that out, divide it over the 12 months, and just count the portion of the payment that would count during that month. That would be one example. But I don't want to confuse that with some of the payments that we really can't count as income because there may be some legal precedent that says we don't count it.
Okay, another question is, do we use gross income from the pay stubs? And the answer to that is yes, it is gross and not net. So before taxes or any other expenses are withdrawn from the paycheck. That's the amount that you use. And then a secondary question is, does tribal ID work for personal identification? Yes, it does. Diane, I'll gear this to you. When will we receive grant documents to complete due diligence, and when will we have the actual start date?
That's a great question. So our anticipated start date was the week of August 17th. Actually, it was originally earlier than that, but we've delayed it by a week. So we do hope to start the program and launch it next week. However, we know that we have to make sure that the centralized intake system is working, so we're testing that now. And so it may be mid to late next week that we start, but we will keep you informed about that process, and we'll likely have an update on Thursday as well. And then the grant agreement, the award letter, and the work plan documents that we referenced in this presentation, along with the list of due diligence items that need to be submitted and all the contract exhibits, including that sort of reporting calendar that was mentioned, that should be coming out in an email to you, hopefully tomorrow or Thursday. But we're just working on the contract documents. I can tell you that this is a very different process for us. We're providing, as you know, an initial selection amount And then after that, there will be sort of a demand pool that will be available so that if organizations are able to expend the funds and have the community need to keep expending funds, that they might be eligible to have additional funds. And so that reporting is going to become really key. And especially what you're inputting into the system will be helpful because you'll be putting expenditures in there. And so we'll be able to see how people are doing, if they're on track with expending dollars. So that's all going to play into this. And it changed the way that the contract language was written. The other thing to keep in mind, and I just appreciate your patience with this, is that this is federal funds. It isn't state funds, so we have to be paying attention to the federal requirements as well and make sure that those get included in the agreement. And this is a new program for the U.S. Treasury, so we're trying to, again, build this program as it's being created, even at the federal level. So just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. But yes, we do anticipate hopefully by Thursday, everyone will have these.
Thank you. I'll read one more and then we'll offer callers an opportunity to ask a question if there's anybody that's interested in doing so. And Hattie, this one's for you. Can administrators upload into the system as well? For example, documents that they collect, and can they scan that into the system?
So administrators can upload documents if you have a client's account credentials, which isn't a great across the board way for an administrator to upload documents. So our guidance on that is if a client doesn't have an online access, doesn't have internet, and is using the administrator to complete the application, that's an instance in which an administrator would use the client's credentials to upload documents. Otherwise, they just need to be kept as paper copies on file.
Thank you, Hattie. Is there anybody on the phone that would like to ask a question?
I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is David Soto with Clues, and I do apologize if this was covered and I missed it. It was mentioned that these are federal funds, so does this mean that undocumented renters wouldn't be eligible for these funding source?
Thanks for the question. That is a good question, and we tried to address this in our frequently asked questions as well, but I know that it's written in more of a subtle way, and I know that it's easier to have clarity, but what I can tell you is that we are not asking for any type of documentation, as I mentioned, for the personal identification, that households can answer that they don't have an ID number, and that funds are being provided directly to the landlord and not the household. So we do have some clarifying information in the frequently asked questions about this on the legal interpretation. And so the answer right now is yes, we will be able to make payments to landlords for households who may be undocumented, but we are, still trying to figure out all of the legal aspects of it. Our understanding is that this also would not count as a public charge if the client is seeking status as a U.S. citizen, but that's sort of our current state right now.
Thank you very much. That was going to be my follow-up question, is the public charge.
Fantastic. And I'll try to make sure that I send out that frequently asked questions to the entire group, because I know that some of the frequently asked questions that were asked came toward the end of the RFP period, and it's very possible that since there were 2 days left to submit the grant materials, that people may not have read them yet. So I'll send that out so that everyone has access to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. We continue to have a number of questions, and I'm mindful of the time. So if anybody does need to leave the phone call, as time permits, we'll continue to record this presentation and answer the questions, and we will then post this on our webpage. If there is not time for us to answer all of these questions, we will definitely find a venue to make sure that we're responding to that, whether it's through updating our FAQs and or providing updated information on Thursday's webinar. There is a question about if a household doesn't have pay stubs. As an example, they're self-employed. How do we verify income? And in that situation, that's an example of when you likely would do the household self-certification, where they would just certify what their annual or monthly income is, and you would go with that documentation. This one's for Hattie. How will we know, or will we know, what other entities in our area will be providing CHAP services?
I actually might defer to you, Nancy and Diane, about how we're going to be sharing other applicant, or kind of when you'll be sharing information about other grantees. The website, the map that Nancy and Diane both mentioned, where an applicant could enter their address and it'll populate the administrators in their area, will be on our website. So that could be one way that an administrator could see, if they entered their address, who else is serving in the area. But Nancy and Diane, I'm not sure if you're planning on sharing all of the administrators' contact information with every administrator. So I might defer to you on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we will try to share the information about the other grant administrators as soon as we're able. One thing that prohibits us from doing that right now is that everybody isn't under a contract agreement with us. So in order to share that information officially, we have to wait until all of the administrators are under contract with Minnesota Housing. And then we can make an announcement once everybody, all 44, are under contract. So in the interim, probably the easiest way would be exactly what Hattie said, to look at that map and see where the grant administrators are in the area. And then also the other possibility would be just letting you know that our board has public information on our website. And so if you go to minnesotahousing.gov and you go to the About Us tab, you'll see the board meeting information. And there was a board meeting on August 7th that listed the recommendations for those organizations that we were requesting approval for this funding. So that's the best clue that I can give you for now. And then hopefully we'll be able to share that administrator information afterwards.
Thank you, Diane. Is the presentation going to be emailed out to us after the meeting? We certainly can send out the PowerPoint that you reviewed during this training. And again, the full presentation will be posted on our website, and that's the website that Diane referred to that will soon be getting updated to reflect that it's a grant administrator website. Are we required to have proof of COVID-related hardship or just proof of past due rent and mortgage? On the household application, the household will self-certify that they are in need of this assistance due to a COVID-19 related circumstance such as illness, unemployment, or reduction in hours. And that's all that we'll require.
Thanks, Nancy.
Some families,
we deliberately,
go ahead, Diane.
We're intentionally not asking for documentation of illness or unemployment, but more the certification that they have had that as a condition. And so they do have to certify by checking the box. And then, of course, they're signing the document that says that everything that they're submitting is true. But we didn't want to get into the situation where we were asking people for medical records, for example. So that's why we're doing it as a self-certification check.
All right. We'll just keep on rolling here. Some families will have difficulty sending documentation due to lack of accessibility due to technology. So how long to wait for people to turn in required documentation? That's a great question and a really understandable concern, especially, it's magnified even more so because of the pandemic. And so we recommend no more than a couple of days. We don't want to keep a household waiting, especially if they're at risk of imminent housing loss. So after if they've clearly stated to you and you're satisfied with that response that they do not have the means to get that to you, that's satisfactory to us. And so under those circumstances, again, no more than 2 or 3 days before you pursue the other 2 options. Are there caps on awards, and can applicants receive awards more than once a year? So in this case, I'm interpreting awards to mean assistance provided to households. Currently, there is no cap on assistance provided, and we do not currently want to see administrators implement a cap. It really would create a barrier for households, and also a challenge if one agency has a cap and the other doesn't, then households might be having to go to multiple places to get the full amount of the assistance that they're needed. And so that is not something currently that we want to see in place. And then the follow-up question to that is, can an applicant apply more than once for assistance? And the answer to that is yes. They would have to present with a new past due invoice that has not been paid, obviously, and as long as they still continue to meet the eligibility requirements, they could receive assistance on more than one occasion. I think we answered the question about e-signature. For the household certification or release of information, unfortunately at this time, they do have to sign, and an e-signature is not available. Is a
Nancy,
W-9, oh, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, can we go to the phone and just see if anyone has a question by phone?
Sure.
And I'm doing this mostly because not everyone knows how to type in the chat function of every application.
Oh,
We're
sure.
all using all these applications, so just making sure. So go ahead if someone has a question on the call. All right, we'll go back to the chat box question. Oh, go ahead.
I was just curious when you thought the training on the online application is going to be offered.
Patty, when do you think that'll be offered?
I will have to follow up with Housing Link. They said that they were working on getting a date when I last talked to them about this. So no date as of yet, but soon.
Very soon. Okay, good. Thanks for the question, though.
All right, there's a few questions about, oh, sorry, Diane. I apologize, everybody.
Oh. No, go ahead.
Okay, there's a few questions about the W-9 as it relates to vendors. So I'll just kind of provide a narrative response to just the collective questions that I see here. So if you as an agency already have an active W-9 on file for a vendor, for example, an existing landlord that you currently work with, you do not need to obtain that from them again. And then there's a question similar to that related to payments to those entities. Again, they do not have to submit a W-9 every time that there's a payment submitted to them. Once you have that in your system and it's updated and accurate, that is all that you need. Diane, I'll let you answer this. If our organization may require changes to contract language, will there be time frame for negotiating that?
That's a great question. Sometimes that does come up, and that's the reason why we do want you to read those contracts carefully. We've even had typos periodically, and so definitely read through that, make sure the amounts are right. But yes, if you have something in the contract that you want to negotiate, please get back to us as soon as possible, and then we'll try to work with our legal team to address that issue. So we have the full support of the staff in our organization. This has been a huge lift by a lot of people across our organization, including folks in single family and our legal department, and they are definitely available for us pretty quickly. So just let us know as soon as you know what you need to change.
All right. Bylaws refer to whom, this organization's bylaws refer to whom is able to sign, but does not list the name of that person. So I'm assuming in this case it may be the title of the person authorized to sign. Will they need additional information of board positions to verify the signer is the signing authority?
Sure. I would say definitely send us your bylaws, and then maybe send us a letter on your organization's letterhead, or if you have something on your website that identifies who's on your board. For example, you could, send a copy of that or a photo of that. That would probably be sufficient.
Are we waiting for the contract before we send any of the due diligence information?
You can get started on sending us documents that you are able to send us as soon as possible. You don't have to wait for the contract agreement to start sending things in. I would definitely work on the DUNS number part for sure. Obviously, you can't send us the work plan and budget because that's a template we'll be providing you, and won't be able to send the contract because that's not been given to you yet. But the other items, definitely you can send those to us.
These are really great questions. Thanks, everybody. Diane, is there a process to receive more funding if the original grant amount is used quickly?
There is. So there is the initial selection amount that'll be in your grant agreement, and then you'll have the opportunity to access what we're calling the demand pool of funds, which will be provided to those organizations who are able to expend the funds quickly and can demonstrate that there's need in the community. And we can see through some of the information and data that we've been collecting, especially, for example, unemployment insurance claims across the state, we have access to some of that data. And we're also open to hearing about the need in your community, especially when there's not data available for that. So for example, in the tribal nations, that same type of data might not be the best indicator, but there might be other indicators of need. But for the most part, we're really going to be looking at the expenses and figuring out which communities are having some emerging needs that we hadn't anticipated over the next 5 months. So for example, a large outbreak of COVID or a large shutdown of several businesses in a community would make a big impact. And that might help drive our decision making toward being able to add assistance to your grant. The other possibility is that if you're not expending funds, if you're not seeing households seek your assistance and you feel like you're going to have leftover funds, we'll be in contact with you about that as well. And those funds might be reallocated to another administrator who can expend them. I think the biggest thing that we have to remember is that we're all partners in this together. We all want to be serving Minnesotans statewide wherever the need emerges. So if you are a grant administrator and you find that your households just aren't seeking assistance in the way that you anticipated, and you feel like you're going to have funds left over, and definitely notify us. We'll obviously be monitoring it, but it's best to have like the two-way communication so that we can kind of make those decisions together.
All right. Pardon me, some of these questions have been sent over a half an hour ago, so I'm just scanning because I do believe we've answered some of these. Let's see.
I mentioned on the last question that we answered, one of the things that some of you may have to do is go to your board to say, hey, we have the grant and here's the amount, but oh, by the way, it might be higher than what we're actually showing you on the document. And I think that's really important. Our contracts are going to be written to allow those grant agreements to receive additional funds, and then also written so that if the funds are not being expended, that they could be reallocated. So I just think it's important to be really upfront with any of your boards or directors who are making the final decisions on the signing of these agreements, that they understand that the amount is an initial amount and it can go up and down through the grant period.
If a household owes 3 or 4 months rent, is that household eligible for all of those months? And the current answer to that is yes, as long as those bills are dated March 1st or later and are past due. As Diane alluded to, we'll really be monitoring the expenditures of this grant very closely We have never administered assistance of this mass proportion in such a short time period. So we will be learning along with you, and especially as COVID may change throughout different areas of the state, we'll really be watching this and meeting internally very closely to analyze expenditures. So if there's any changes to that, we would definitely communicate that to you. But currently, there is no cap on household assistance. Is there a specific protocol as to what time period is counted for income, i.e. last month, current month, or next month?
Right. We give some flexibility around that. So, for example, the prior month, a household may have received income that would not allow them to qualify, but then during the current month, they lost their job, so they won't have a paycheck going forward. It's okay then to use the income of the current month in order to help the household qualify, especially if they haven't paid their rent for that particular month and it's past due.
Is there anybody on the phone line that would like to ask a question?
A question, Nancy, this is Assad with New American Development Center. I have seen 300% or 200% poverty line. Would you please send a sheet, guideline for income, those who are 300%, the family size, the income annual or monthly, for a reference?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We currently have that on our website, and we've received a little bit of feedback that table is a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. So we'll be simplifying that table to show 300% and 200%. And in addition, when we send you out the income calculation workbook that you'll be able to use to calculate income, there will be a tab at the end of that workbook. So once you determine what a household income is, you can go to that tab to reference both the 300% and 200% table to verify whether they qualify or not. So we will make sure that we update that information on our site so it's a little bit more clear to folks. Great question. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I will just clarify. Oh, go ahead, Diane.
Oh, I was just going to say that brings up a really good point, though, about sort of the preference piece. And I know folks had talked about the 200% and how much of the grant are we talking about. We're not expecting that there's a certain portion of the grant that's going to be expended on people at 200%. We are expecting that people try to create that prioritization of households that are at 200%, but it's going to be a fluid thing. You might have a week's worth of applications or a couple days worth of applications that you're looking at, and first you're prioritizing the 200% out of those. And then you might pay some folks that are at 300% until you get some more applications in. So we do understand that this isn't going to be a perfect process, but we wanted to make sure that we prioritize the lower income whenever we could. So we know that this is going to be a little bit of a challenge, and we'll all have to learn from each other about how we do that process. We do expect that information will be put into Housing Link by the administrator. And so as applications are being processed, you'll put into the system whether they're 200% or 300%. And I think that will really help because you'll be able to see, I believe, a report that would show where the incomes are so that you could easily sort it. Is that right, Hattie?
As I said earlier, we're still working through with Housing Link the best method for identifying households who are below 200%, but we will have more information on that shortly.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, Diane, will tribal administrators be allowed to target tribal members and other Native American people?
Yes, within the boundaries of the reservation, they are able to prioritize tribal members and Native Americans.
All right. And I know there are some really great Housing Link questions, and if we're not able to answer them all, I just want to clarify. And first of all, thank you for your patience and understand that this is a really parallel process as we're implementing this grant and determining federal requirements. we're doing the same with other parts of this program implementation, including Housing Link. That said, Hattie, I'm going to refer this to you. Will the online application system gather all required reporting information? And then a follow-up to that is, will Minnesota Housing pull those reports in that way? Or will we have another system to pull reports, or I'm sorry, will we have to have another system to pull reports to submit?
Yes, so we're working with Housing Link to be able to report the dollar amount of approved applications that I believe is the information that you all need to report on. And that should be available for you all to see in the system as well. As I mentioned in the webinar, one of the pieces of information administrators will need to put into the system is the final amount that you all are paying out, because that will likely be different than what the applicant is asking for in their application. And that information will help create the report that we need, and then also you need to report on the dollar amounts that you ultimately approved for those applications. So I think that answered the question, and was also a reminder that there will be pieces of information that as administrators you'll need to enter in once you've approved an application for payment.
Thank you, Hattie. And Hattie, I'm going to direct this question to you because I know we've had a little back and forth on the final language, and I think you're the most up to date. But this is relating to assets or savings. And so the question is, are there assets or saving limits for this program? And I know we've looked at a self-certification, but perhaps you can clarify what that language will look like.
I believe that we ask clients to self-certify that they don't have sufficient assets. So I don't believe that we ask, or that there's a limit on the assets, but we ask that a client self-certify that they don't have sufficient assets to address the their need.
And just to add to that, we will not be requiring that they inform us or provide evidence of what they have for assets or for savings. Does the stimulus, household stimulus payment, and the extra $600 in unemployment count towards income? That's a really good question. The one-time federal stimulus payment does not count towards income, and the $600 supplemental unemployment, should that get renewed, or if if you're looking at the most recent income and they have that, that does get counted as income. There's a question about if grantees are required to keep a paper file. If you keep your documents electronically, and have an electronic file management system, that is just fine. We would not require you to keep an additional paper file of your household files. I'm still not clear on how the applications come to us through the system. Will we get an email, or will we be going to the website to look for applicants?
Housing Link will cover this in a little more detail during their training, but you administrators will have a login capabilities to the system, and that's where you'll see who has been assigned to your agency. And then it's also where you can track in that queue if a client has completed their application, or if a client is in the process of they've started an application but they haven't completed it. So again, Housing Link will cover this in their training, but you all will have login credentials to the system that will show the queue of individuals who are assigned to your organization.
All right, we have just a few more questions, and then we'll allow people on the phone to ask a couple questions, and we'll plan on wrapping up within the next roughly 5 minutes. And then you see our contact information on the screen in front of you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time if you have any questions. We understand that we're all working this together and things are moving very rapidly, and we'll do our best to respond to you as timely as possible. So are we able to use any of these funds to cover staff time for administrators or indirect costs associated with administering the program? And the answer to that is yes, that there's a cap on the amount of administration that's allowed, and that will be tied to the percent that you applied for in your application. And so while the cap is 15%, if in your application you propose 14%, that is the percentage that will appear in your grant contract. And there's two types of administrative expenses that are allowed. One is for the direct expenses, which is for essentially staffing, and then the remainder will make up indirect expenses, and that can include costs for administration to oversee the program and administer funding. There's two more, and then we will give folks on the phone an opportunity, and then we'll wrap up. When determining federal poverty guidelines, are there any guidelines for who counts as a household member when determining household size? Or just anyone living in the household counts and their income counts in the calculation? That's a really good question. I think we can answer it generally, and I think the caveat being that sometimes there are extenuating circumstances, and we see this with our existing prevention program. Even with that program, it's been in existence for about 30 years, and it's really awesome how we still get these questions, and Diane and I will look at each other and go, wow, after all these years, I don't think we've ever seen this question. And so the biggest thing that I'll say is if you are not sure if a household should be included, please reach out to us. So there's really not a straightforward answer. But generally, if there's a household member that's a permanent or near permanent person in the household, generally speaking, that income would count. For minors age 17 and under, their income would not count in income calculation. And can applications, Diane, this is for you, this is our last question. Can applications be forwarded from one admin, or perhaps Hattie, from one admin to another?
Yes, there is the ability to transfer applicants from one administrator to another. We haven't quite worked out what that process looks like, but it is possible.
All right, I think we covered everybody's question. There were multiple versions sometimes of the same question, so I might have skipped some of those. If I missed you, I apologize. Please follow up with us if we didn't answer all your questions. Is there anybody on the phone that has any final questions before we conclude our webinar today?
Yeah, this is Dana Snell with the Minnesota Homeownership Center. We're doing homeownership only, and I have a number of kind of very specific homeownership related questions, and I want to respect it's 45 minutes past your end time, so I don't necessarily need them answered today, but I'm wondering if I should put them together and send them to someone, or if there's an opportunity to talk with someone to get them answered, or what's the best approach?
Sure. I think if you email us the set of questions, that'll be helpful. And then we can also add that to our sort of frequently asked questions as well, in case anyone else needs the answer. I also noticed that you had a question about the current existing network, about whether they provide homeownership assistance. They do provide mortgage assistance in some cases for people that have fallen behind on their mortgage, but they're not typically in the existing network of the prevention programs that I mentioned. They're not necessarily doing any type of mortgage forbearance programs or really specific mortgage counseling. They're just simply providing the one-time payment for mortgage.
Financial. Okay. All right. That's helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll put together some questions and send it. Who should I send it to?
You can send it to Nancy and I.
Okay.
To Diane and Nancy. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Thank you so much.
You.
Any other questions on the phone? Okay. Again, if we missed your question, please for sure email us and we'll try to get an answer. And we'll also try to keep the answers so that everyone can read those if needed. And we really appreciate your attendance with this webinar. We will be back again on Thursday to talk more about the contract documents themselves and the attachments. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.